Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel, The Medieval Reader. I haven't done a recent reads video in quite a while, so I thought I would talk about the books that I've read since Booktubeathon. If you're interested in the books I read during Booktubeathon, I kept a daily vlog, so you can go and check those out. But I want to talk about the books I've read since, and they cover a wide range of topics, as you will see. So the first book I read was The Buried Giant by Kazuo Ishiguro. So I first heard about this book on Mercedes' channel, Mercy's Bookish Musings, and she didn't like the book. But here's an example of how valuable negative reviews can be. She was explaining why she didn't like the book, and as she was describing the problems she had with it, I thought, you know what? I bet I'll like this. I think I know what Ishiguro is trying to do, and I was right. I heard an interview where he confirmed my suspicions that Ishiguro was trying to write in the style of the Arthurian legends, so the Arthurian stories that were written in the 12th century by French authors, such as Chrétien de Troyes and Marie de France. Most people don't know this, but the Arthurian legends were first written in French. That Ishiguro was trying to write in that style. Now, this is not an Arthurian retelling, however, it does take place in an Arthurian universe. You have a couple named Axel and Beatrice, who for some reason are not allowed to have a candle at their house. They leave their village to visit their son, and along the way, they accompany a boy who has been attacked by an ogre, and there's a warrior who's protecting him, and the little boy are leaving, and the couple goes along with them. They're visiting this monastery because there's a monk there who will be able to help both the couple as well as the warrior and the young boy. There is this mist that takes away people's memory, and the couple doesn't know who's responsible for the mist. But a lot of this book isn't about the adventure. It's more about memory and the value of memory. Whether memory is always something that we want to have. The Arthurian aspects are really fun. I mean, their legend is very entertaining if you like Arthurian stories. So the characters are one-dimensional. The plot is quite ridiculous. The dialogue is weird. But if you've read T.H. White's Once and Future King, you know that Arthurian retellings are like that. And in fact, the original Arthurian stories are just as ridiculous. So I didn't have a problem with that at all, because again, I knew what Ishiguro was trying to do. In some ways, without spoiling it, it's like an Arthurian story told through a post-colonial lens. So, again, I don't want to spoil it, but it is really, I thought, an excellent book. It helped that I knew what Ishiguro was trying to accomplish. But I will link below Mercedes' review, just so that you can, compare them. But yeah, negative reviews can be valuable because sometimes that actually encourages me to read the book. And I'm really glad that I read this book. So I plan on reading other things by Ishiguro. This was my first work by him. Then I read Scotus for Dunces by Mary Beth Ingham, and that is such a different book. So Mary Beth Ingham is a philosopher. She studies medieval philosophy, and particularly the thought of John Duns Scotus, who was a late 13th century scholastic. He was born 50 years after Thomas Aquinas, and actually was working at a time when Thomas Aquinas' thought was under condemnation. At least some of his teachings were condemned by the Archbishop of Paris, Etienne Tempier. There was this condemnation of 1277, and so Scotus had to keep that in mind. Now, Scotus is famous for his insanely difficult, convoluted, not entirely systematic theology. He's considered the subtle doctor. I would sometimes call him the ridiculous doctor. It is just definitely that stereotypical scholastic counting angels on pinheads, which of course they never did, but you know what I mean. So a book called Scotus for Dunces is welcome. I really liked how Ingham was able to express Scotus's thought in more or less layman's terms. You kind of have to have a little bit of a philosophical background. At times it gets really complicated. However, It's worse if you try to read Scotus's writings, which he includes in the appendices at the end of the book. So it's almost like 60% of the book is actually Ingham's commentary, and 40% is Scotus's writings. So I got it on Kindle. You probably will want to get it on Kindle. I don't know how much print copies actually cost. I really liked it. Mary Beth Ingham is a sister. I don't know if she's a Franciscan herself, but clearly she thinks that Scotus, who was a Franciscan himself, has something to contribute, and that he represents the Franciscan tradition, so she really tries to read Scotus from within that tradition. She thinks that when you miss the Franciscan context in which he wrote, you miss a lot. And I really like that. I thought that Ingham did a good job in trying to make Scotus's thought valuable, at least to someone like myself, who really likes Franciscan thought and Franciscan spirituality. I would recommend it to anybody who likes religious philosophy. I think the Scotus's view of humanity is definitely much more optimistic than Augustine's or Thomas Aquinas's. So he really thinks that all people have a knowledge of the good. He has a more optimistic view of all of humanity. He also tends to emphasize human goodness over human sinfulness. He has a very creation-centered spirituality, which is very useful today. So Ingham really thinks that Scotus has something positive to contribute to Christianity today, as well as to anybody who is interested in helping the world be a better place. So I really like that. I mean, it felt like an essay at times, but it was also clear that Ingham knew what she was talking about. She is definitely a leading scholar in Scotus. So I definitely recommend that book if you're into such things. Then I read Courrier Sud by Antoine de Saint-Exupery. Now, Antoine de Saint-Exupery is the author of The Little Prince, and Courrier Sud is translated as Southern Mail Carrier. This is a book that I've read 2 or 3 times before, and it's actually quite a challenging book to read. I thought at first that it was just because it was in French, and while my French is quite good, there are a lot of terms in this book that I needed to look up to be able to understand what was going on. There's a lot of technical language. It's another flight novel, just like The Little Prince, and like all of Saint-Exupéry's works. But this one follows Bernice, who is missing, and the narrator, whom I'll just call Antoine, he's the author, I'm going to assume is the author. While it's fictional, it seems as if it's the author who is the voice. He recalls different episodes in Bernice's life. He talks about his experience knowing Bernice as a friend. He talks about Bernice's affair with a married woman named Geneviève. He talks about Bernice's struggles with identity, with loneliness. He talks about the beauties but also the challenges of flight. And in the early days of flight, flying was so dangerous. Bernice is a mail carrier. He carries mail. But it was really a dangerous business. And if you've read Saint-Exupéry's other works, which are more autobiographical, you know that people died, and Bernice does as well. So it seems like I've just told you the whole plot, right? Well, no, this is a work of literary fiction, and the language is absolutely beautiful. I think that if you've only read The Little Prince, or if you haven't, and maybe you don't like fantastical things, I think you will really like Southern Mail Carrier. It gives us a glimpse into a world that most of us have never had experience with. You know, some people are afraid of flying. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of flying, but flight was so dangerous at this time. And even while I'm not a fan of adultery either, I definitely feel for Bernice as well as Geneviève, and they have just this fascinating relationship. So I loved this book, and I would highly recommend it. It's very short, so it shouldn't take long, but there are different scenes, and there's kind of this interweaving of the different scenes in Bernice's life. It makes it challenging, especially when it starts talking about airplane repairs, and there's some telegrams, and it is a complicated narrative structure, but it's short, and it's beautiful, so I recommend it. And finally, I finished Super Capitalism by Robert B. Reich. Supercapitalism is the term that Reich uses to talk about capitalism in the United States today, as just global capitalism in general. So not just the US, but also Japan and China and the UK. And I thought that this was really a nice introduction for me to learn about global capitalism and how it's transformed America in the past century. How did it come about, and its effect on our power as citizens. It was a pretty sober read, because I never really thought about the power that consumers have. I mean, it's obvious, right? There's advertisement everywhere. We buy products. But thinking about how my buying hurts other people, having it all spelled out like that was just really hard to read at times. But I thought very important. Reich then offers a solution to supercapitalism. Basically, he argues that corporations need to stop being treated as people. I'm not going to go into too much detail, and I think that this book will definitely give me some fodder for my Wisdom Wednesdays. In some ways, it reminded me of certain themes in Jayber Crow, particularly when it was talking about corporations and what corporations do versus what individuals do, and how while buying power has increased, our power as citizens has decreased. But also how, while we condemn Walmart, we also like Walmart because it gives us cheap products. So I was feeling very convicted. I just read Scotus for Dunces, which is this optimistic view in humanity, and then there's Supercapitalism, which talks about another side of humanity that we'd rather overlook. But anyway, I definitely think that if you are interested in politics, particularly liberal politics, but you want something that's not so optimistic, that really tries to take a cynical look at efforts so far at trying to combat supercapitalism, I definitely recommend Reich's book. I didn't feel that it was, utopian or anything like that. So I do recommend it. And it's a good introduction. It's in layman's terms. So I liked it. I thought it was good. So let me know if you've read any of these books and what you thought about it. And I'm filming as much as possible before I move again. I am a nomadic person. So, talk to you later. Bye now.